November 12, 1942, Richmond, California. A new kind of miracle stood ready at the edge of San Francisco Bay. 441 feet of steel, a cargo vessel weighing nearly 28 million pounds, gleaming beneath the morning haze, waiting to glide into the Pacific through the gates of the Permanente Metals Corporation. Yard number 2. It had been built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Until that moment, such a feat was unthinkable. For centuries, master shipwrights had labored for 6 to 8 months to construct vessels of this size, traditions reaching back to before the American Revolution. But this ship, the SS Robert E. Peary, stood ready in less than a week. More than 1,000 workers stepped back from her hull. Not the old-world master craftsman, but America's new kind of builder. Former secretaries, farmers, housewives, and laborers, their hands now calloused from welding torches they had learned to use only weeks before. On the shoreline, journalists, naval officials, and rival shipyard owners gathered in disbelief. They weren't just witnessing a ship launch, they were watching a revolution, a transformation that would rewrite the limits of industrial production and change the course of the war. Because in 1942, the mathematics of Allied victory were being written not in tactics or strategy, but in steel and speed, in the cold, relentless numbers of production that would decide the fate of nations. The revolution had begun 2 years earlier, on December 27, 1940. That day, a man named Henry J. Kaiser signed his first shipbuilding contract. Kaiser had never built a ship. He had never run a shipyard. His life or work had been on land, moving mountains and pouring concrete for America's massive dam projects across the West. Now, at 58 years old, this construction magnate had promised the U.S. Maritime Commission he would deliver 30 cargo vessels for Britain within 2 years. Traditional shipbuilders laughed him off as a naive opportunist. Even Todd Bath Iron Works, one of America's oldest yards, agreed to partner with him only out of obligation, certain that their expertise would have to save him from failure. But Henry Kaiser's greatest advantage was his inexperience, because he didn't know what couldn't be done. Watching skeptically from the sidelines was William Francis Gibbs, America's preeminent naval architect, the man whose firm, Gibbs & Cox, had designed the Liberty ship's plans based on British blueprints. Gibbs had designed more ships than Kaiser had ever seen in his life. The journey from skepticism to revolution began inside the Todd Shipyards planning offices in New York, early in 1941. When Kaiser's engineers studied traditional shipbuilding procedures, one thing became immediately clear. Conventional methods would never meet the demands of global war. Kaiser's chief engineer, Clay Bedford, had recently toured a Ford Motor Company assembly line in Detroit. He'd watched car chassis glide past rows of workers, each adding prefabricated parts with practiced precision. To Bedford, the vision was electric, and he returned to California convinced that ships could be built the same way. Traditional shipwrights were horrified. Comparing shipbuilding to car assembly was, to them, pure heresy. Then came Kaiser's most audacious proposal: eliminate riveting entirely. For generations, ship hulls had been bound together by rivets, red-hot steel pins hammered through overlapping plates by highly trained crews. A perfect team might install 100 rivets in a day. Each Liberty ship required nearly 1 million. Kaiser wanted to replace it all with electric arc welding, a technique he'd perfected on pipeline projects in the deserts of the West. Vice Admiral Emory Land, chairman of the U.S. Maritime Commission, was deeply skeptical. In a private letter now preserved in the National Archives, he warned, "Welding has never been proven reliable for hull construction at this scale. The British Navy forbids it on warships. Kaiser proposes we bet America's supply lines on an untested method." But Land also understood a harsher truth. The Allies were running out of time. By the end of 1941, German U-boats and surface raiders had sent 3.6 million tons of Allied shipping to the ocean floor. Britain was starving. Traditional shipyards took 230 days to build a single cargo ship. At that pace, the Atlantic would be lost before America could even enter the fight. Kaiser's contract wasn't approved because of confidence. It was approved out of desperation. By December 1941, his Richmond shipyard rose from the mudflats of San Francisco Bay, a vast complex built not by shipwrights, but by dam builders and highway engineers. To traditionalists, the place was a nightmare. Where the old yards had majestic gantry cranes and long, narrow slipways, Kaiser's looked like an automobile plant. Huge open lots surrounded 7 parallel building ways, linked by a web of railroad tracks that ferried prefabricated steel sections, some weighing up to 150 tons. Overhead cranes, spaced every 100 feet, could lift entire ship segments in a single motion. John Riley, chief naval architect for Bethlehem Steel and a 30-year veteran, toured the site in May 1941. His confidential report mixed technical disdain with reluctant awe. Kaiser has violated every principle of efficient shipyard layout I've learned in 3 decades. His prefabrication areas are too large. His cranes are excessive. His building ways are too short. Yet, the facility is perfectly designed for what he claims: the rapid assembly of prefabricated sections. Then came the workers, the lifeblood of the revolution. Traditional shipyards hired only from coastal towns where shipwright skills passed from father to son. Kaiser recruited from everywhere, placing ads nationwide that promised 20% higher pay and training for anyone willing to work. By August 1941, thousands arrived in Richmond, men and women from farms, offices, and small towns, many who had never seen the ocean before. Complex tasks were broken down into simple, repeatable operations, just like Detroit's assembly lines. By October, over 10,000 workers filled the Richmond yards. Fewer than 200 had ever worked on a ship before. Where traditional welders required 4 years of apprenticeship, Kaiser's trainers produced skilled specialists in 2 weeks. Workers didn't need to master everything, just the precise seam, the deck plate, the curve they'd weld hundreds of times a day. By early 1942, something remarkable happened. Ship construction times began collapsing. The first Liberty ship took 197 days to complete. The second, 169. The fifth, 128. By the 10th, 97 days. By the spring of 1942, Richmond was finishing Liberty ships in just 70 days, matching the output of the oldest, most skilled shipyards in America. Kaiser's system worked. Instead of building ships from keel to deck in sequence, his workers built the entire ship in sections, simultaneously. Bows, sterns, decks, bulkheads, and engine rooms were all fabricated at once in different parts of the yard, then hoisted together like pieces of an enormous steel puzzle. As Albert Wooding, production supervisor at Yard Number 2, told Fortune magazine in 1943, "In traditional shipbuilding, everything happens in sequence. The engine room must be built before the engine can be installed. We build both at once. When they're ready, we drop the finished engine into the finished engine room. What once took weeks now takes hours." The numbers were staggering. Where once 50 men had spent 3 weeks installing an engine inside a half-built hull, Kaiser's crews assembled and installed the entire structure in 5 days, with 200 workers and a single 8-hour crane operation. It wasn't just faster. It was a complete redefinition of industrial warfare. Traditionalists called it reckless. Kaiser called it flexibility. By the spring of 1942, even the doubters began to change. Vice Admiral Howard Vickery, once a fierce critic, wrote in his commission notes, "I opposed Kaiser's simplified drawings at first. Ships are not automobiles. Maritime construction demands precision. But by March, his yards were outproducing ours by 40%. By June, by 70%. I learned that perfection is the enemy of sufficient." Kaiser's ships weren't elegant, but they floated, they carried cargo, and most importantly, they were ready. Across the West Coast, his 7 shipyards became engines of production in California, Oregon, and Washington. His son, Edgar Kaiser, managing the Oregon yards, and Clay Bedford in Richmond, turned shipbuilding into a contest of speed and pride. By the fall of 1942, their rivalry made headlines. Newspapers printed updates like sports scores. In September, the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation launched the Joseph N. Teal in just 10 days. Admiral Vickery eventually halted the competitions, calling them publicity stunts. But by then, the message was clear. Speed was possible and expected. Then came November 1942. During a routine inspection, Vice Admiral Land offhandedly remarked to reporters that Liberty ship construction had made remarkable progress, but still lagged behind true mass production standards. Clay Bedford took that as a challenge. He promised Land that Richmond Yard No. 2 would build an entire Liberty ship from keel to launch in under 10 days. Land, skeptical but intrigued, agreed, on one condition: it must not disrupt normal production. Bedford chose hull No. 47 to be named the SS Robert E. Peary after the famed Arctic explorer. At 1 minute past midnight, Sunday, November 8th, more than 1,000 workers began what no one in maritime history had ever attempted. The prefabrication method reached its ultimate form. Every major component, bow, stern, engine, cargo holds, had already been built, inspected, and staged before the keel was even laid. The bow section, made of more than 50 welded pieces, came preloaded with its anchor hardware, chain lockers, and crew quarters. The stern carried its steering gear, propeller shaft, and aft spaces already complete. 4 cargo holds, each a steel giant, waited beside the slipway. And in a warehouse nearby, a 140-ton triple-expansion steam engine, built and tested by Joshua Hendy Iron Works in Sunnyvale, sat ready to be dropped into place. By the 4th day of construction, the transformation was nearly complete. Where traditional shipyards once took months to build from keel to deck, Henry Kaiser's workers, men and women who had been farmers' clerks and teachers only months before, were now assembling a fully formed Liberty ship in mere days. The hull was finished. The massive engine was mounted and aligned. Deck houses, cargo holds, and steering gear, all secured and ready. On Thursday, November 12, 1942, at precisely 3:30 p.m., the moment arrived. Just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after the keel first touched the building ways, the SS Robert E. Peary thundered down the greased launch rails and slid into the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. 3 days later, on November 15th, the ship was officially delivered. 7 days, 14 hours, and 32 minutes from start to finish. No one had ever witnessed anything like it. Maritime officials, Navy officers, rival shipyard owners, and journalists had all gathered, many expecting a disaster or a hollow publicity stunt, but what they saw instead left them silent. The vessel was no showpiece. It was fully operational, needing only minor fitting out before sailing. Vice Admiral Emory Land, head of the U.S. Maritime Commission, stood among the stunned crowd. Before the newsreel cameras, his words carried the weight of an era ending. 6 months ago, I would have called this impossible. Traditional shipbuilding wisdom, 3,000 years of it, said you cannot build a proper ship in 5 days. Henry Kaiser has made traditional wisdom obsolete. And with that, the old world of shipbuilding collapsed. Within weeks, the Maritime Commission issued new directives. All American shipyards would adopt Kaiser's methods: prefabrication, modular assembly, welding instead of riveting, techniques once dismissed as reckless, were now the blueprint for victory. The psychological impact was seismic. The same shipwrights who had once mocked Kaiser as an outsider now sent delegations to study his process. In December 1942, the president of the venerable New York Shipbuilding Corporation visited Richmond himself. His confidential report to his board read less like a critique and more like a confession of defeat. Kaiser has achieved what we believed impossible by rejecting our limitations. He treated shipbuilding as a problem of manufacturing, not of tradition. He simplified where we sought perfection. He standardized where we customized. He trained the untrained and built ships in 1/10 the time at 2/3 the cost. We must either adopt his ways or accept irrelevance. By early 1943, Henry Kaiser's revolution had spread across the nation. 18 shipyards were now building Liberty ships using his assembly line techniques. Average construction time had dropped from 230 days to just 42. The United States was now launching 3 Liberty ships every single day, more tonnage than German U-boats could ever sink. But Kaiser's greatest challenge to the old order wasn't just industrial, it was human. Inside his shipyards, the face of the American workforce changed forever. Tens of thousands of women, African Americans, and unskilled laborers now stood shoulder to shoulder, welding steel that would carry the Allies to victory. By 1944, his 7 shipyards employed nearly 200,000 people, and over 40,000 were women. At Richmond, women made up more than a quarter of the entire workforce. In the Pacific Northwest, another 31,000 women joined the effort, their coveralls and welding masks replacing aprons and typewriters. Equally revolutionary was racial integration. Kaiser's shipyards hired tens of thousands of African American workers, assigning them not just to menial jobs, but to skilled and supervisory positions. Welders, crane operators, foremen, in an era when segregation was still law across much of the country. The old guild system that had once guarded maritime craft like a secret society was gone. Kaiser had democratized skill itself. This new industrial culture came alive on Christmas Day, 1943. While traditional yards went silent for the holidays, Kaiser's workers kept building, but not without spirit. That day, as snow dusted the hills above Richmond, Christmas dinner was served right in the shipyard cafeterias. Turkey, ham, and all the trimmings, free to anyone on shift. Local churches sent choirs to sing carols between the steel hulls. The Richmond Municipal Band played under floodlights, and Henry Kaiser himself walked the lines, shaking hands, thanking workers by name. He wasn't just building ships anymore, he was building belief. By mid-1944, Kaiser's yards had launched over 800 Liberty ships. Nationwide, the total reached 2,400 vessels, a fleet so vast that even German intelligence reports could scarcely believe it. The newer Victory ships, faster and larger, followed the same principles. In all, between 1941 and 1945, American shipyards produced over 5,500 vessels, amounting to 53 million tons of shipping, a scale of production unmatched in human history. Across the Atlantic, the British Admiralty watched in awe. Commander Joseph Kenworthy of the Royal Navy, serving with the British delegation in Washington, wrote, "The United States is building merchant shipping at a rate beyond the capacity of the rest of the world combined. Kaiser alone produces more tonnage monthly than the entire British shipbuilding industry. Their methods are crude, their ships inelegant, but they float, they carry cargo, and there are thousands of them. The Royal Navy builds perfection. The Americans build adequacy multiplied by thousands, and adequacy multiplied by thousands wins wars." When the war ended, the skeptics predicted collapse. Surely the shipyards would fall silent, the workers laid off, the facilities abandoned. And they were, at least partly. By late 1945, production ceased. Workforces shrank from hundreds of thousands to mere thousands. The once thundering Richmond yards stood quiet by spring of 1946. But Kaiser's revolution didn't die. The knowledge, his prefabrication, welding, and parallel assembly spread worldwide. When Japan and South Korea rebuilt their shipbuilding industries in the 1950s and 1960s, they studied Kaiser's Liberty program. They copied his techniques. And from those lessons grew the great modern shipyards of Ulsan and Nagasaki, which would dominate global shipbuilding for decades. By the early 1970s, maritime historian John Bunker would write, Henry Kaiser entered shipbuilding as an outsider, unbound by tradition, guided only by logic and necessity. In 3 years, he built more ships than America had in its entire previous century. But more than that, he changed how ships would be built forever. Today, every major shipyard, from container vessels in Korea to cruise liners in Europe, still uses methods born in Kaiser A.S. Liberty program. The statistics remain staggering. 2,710 Liberty ships built between 1941 and 1945. An average of 1.8 ships per day at the peak. 490 ships built by Kaiser's yards alone. Construction times plummeted from 230 days to just 42, with the record-holding SS Robert E. Peary completed in 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. Each ship displaced 14,145 tons, could carry 10,800 tons of cargo, and steamed at 11 knots. Not fast, but fast enough to win a war of supply. They were supposed to last 5 years. Some are still afloat after 8 decades. The SS John W. Brown sails today as a museum in Baltimore. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien, preserved in San Francisco, even steamed back to Normandy in 1994 for the 50th anniversary of D-Day under her own power. Another, the SS Hellas Liberty, rests in Greece, and the final Liberty ship ever built, the SS Albert M. Bow, lives on, converted into the Star of Kodiak, headquarters of Trident Seafoods in Alaska. 80 years later, Kaiser's ships still work, still serve, still float. And through them, his legacy endures. A reminder that America's greatest weapon in World War II wasn't a gun or a plane. It was the factory, the worker, and the belief that nothing was impossible. 5 months ahead of schedule, Henry Kaiser A.S. Mills were producing over 700,000 tons of steel a year. An achievement that transformed California into a true industrial power for the first time. His empire didn't just build ships, it built the infrastructure of victory. Magnesium for incendiary bombs, aluminum for aircraft, both flowed from new Kaiser plants woven into the vast fabric of America's wartime production miracle. The effect rippled across the Pacific coast. In California, Oregon, and Washington, small towns erupted into sprawling centers of industrial life. Richmond, California, once a quiet community of 23,000, swelled to over 100,000 residents by 1943, fueled entirely by the hunger of the shipyards. Kaiser built entire cities from scratch. In Oregon, Vanport City rose from empty fields to become the state's second-largest city. Over 40,000 people, every one of them tied to shipbuilding or its supporting trades. These were boom towns, built in haste and destined to fade, yet their brief existence proved the transformative power of focused industrial investment. From that crucible came another unexpected revolution: modern healthcare. To care for his massive workforce, Kaiser joined forces with physician Dr. Sidney Garfield, creating a system of prepaid preventive medical care, the foundation of what would become Kaiser Permanente. What began as a necessity for welders and riveters would evolve into one of America's largest health organizations, serving over 12 million members by the 21st century. Kaiser's legacy was never just steel and ships, it was people. Men and women who had once believed factory gates were closed to them suddenly found opportunity. For many, especially women and minorities, the shipyards became a training ground for skills, leadership, and confidence that would last a lifetime. The innovations born in Richmond's Liberty Ship program reshaped entire industries. Welding techniques refined under wartime pressure became standard in steel construction, petroleum refining, and heavy manufacturing. The concept of prefabrication, once radical, revolutionized housing, bridge building, and industrial facilities across America. The organizational genius behind it all, parallel production, simplified specifications, rapid worker training, became the backbone of modern industrial engineering and operations management. By the mid-1980s, Harvard A.S. professor Michael Porter, would point to Kaiser's shipyards as a defining case study in American competitiveness, proof that industrial capacity is not fixed but can be created when necessity demands it. Before the war, the United States had almost no merchant shipbuilding capacity. Within 2 years, American yards were producing more tonnage than the rest of the world combined. The message was clear. The limits of industry were psychological, not physical. The shipyards had revealed something deeper, that speed, skill, and scale were all matters of organization, imagination, and belief. The Liberty Ship program changed not just production, but perception. It shattered the myth that only time and tradition could yield mastery. Kaiser's engineers and foremen learned that excellence could be designed, trained, and scaled. They proved that factories could learn, that people, properly organized and inspired, could do the impossible. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, would later write in his 1960 memoir, "We fought across 5,000 miles of ocean, supplied by ships built faster than the enemy could sink them." Japan's war planners had assumed America's capacity was finite, that enough torpedoes and bombs could strangle her supply lines. But they had not accounted for Henry Kaiser. By 1944, America was replacing shipping losses faster than Japan could inflict them. The war of attrition had turned into a war of arithmetic, and the math favored the side that could build 3 ships a day against the side that could only sink 2. In the end, the Pacific War was won not only on the beaches of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, but in the shipyards of Richmond, Portland, and Baltimore. The miracle of production was America's secret weapon. Kaiser's greatest achievement was not the 1,490 ships his yards built. It was the transformation of what industry itself believed was possible. The Robert E. Peary, completed in less than 5 days, stood as living proof that tradition did not equal truth, that impossible was merely untested. The same maritime establishment that had mocked Kaiser in 1940 as a reckless outsider would spend the next generation studying his methods. His welders, fitters, and electricians, once ordinary citizens, carried their wartime skills into peacetime industries, rebuilding an economy and reshaping a nation. The principles forged in emergency became peacetime standards across the world. Faster production cycles, worker training, modular design, and systems thinking. The Liberty Ship story endures because it is not just about steel and rivets. It is about transformation through demonstration. It reminds us that the greatest revolutions often come from those unconstrained by tradition, from those bold enough to ask not, "Can we?" but "Why not?" Kaiser's shipyard workers were not superhuman. They were ordinary people who achieved the extraordinary because someone believed they could, and built a system that let them prove it. Today, the Liberty ships are mostly gone, scrapped, sunk, or resting on ocean floors. But their spirit remains everywhere. In every modern shipyard, in every factory using prefabrication, in every training program that prizes focused skill over slow apprenticeship, and in every leader who dares to challenge what impossible really means. From December 1940, when Kaiser signed his first ship contract with no experience, to November 1942, when the Robert E. Peary launched in less than 5 days, to September 1945, when the last Liberty ship left the slipway. The arc of his story redefined industrial history. Those 2,110 Liberty ships carried more than cargo across the oceans. They carried proof that when necessity meets imagination, when ordinary people are organized toward an extraordinary goal, human ingenuity can move faster than fear and further than tradition ever allowed. That is Henry Kaiser's true legacy. Not carved in steel, but in the enduring idea that the limits of possibility exist only until someone refuses to believe in them.